Welcome to A New Era of Dentistry, the ultimate podcast for uncovering the latest trends, breakthroughs, and real-life stories in the dental industry, hosted by Ashley Bond with Wisdom, along with co-host Stephanie Neville. This podcast will explore hot topics, chat with industry leaders, and share the stories that are redefining how dental professionals enhance patient care and the dental practice environment. Let's get started and reshape the future of dental care together, one episode at a time. Welcome back to A New Era of Dentistry. On this week's episode, we are really excited to have Jonathan Bonanno here. He is the CEO of Zia. He also holds a PhD in industrial and organizational psychology, which we all know probably isn't paid attention to enough in general, but especially with dental specific content and awareness. And he specializes in that. So we are really pleased to be able to gain some insight and some tips overall from him today. Also, a side note, he is the host of the Chief Psycho podcast. We'll give a little more info on that later, so make sure you check that out too. And he and Ashley, who is here with us today as well, of course, both spoke recently at SCN, the Speaking and Consulting Network, and collaborated a little bit there. So putting these great minds together to learn, as always. So I guess, Jonathan, I want to open it up today by asking you, how did you get here?
Absolutely. Well, thank you both so much for having me on. I'm so excited to be here with the two of you. And it was such a great time at the SCN Summit this year. That was my first time really being introduced to a new community of individuals and professionals. And, I'm really excited to learn from so many great people like Ashley. I was geeking out over all of Ashley's looks. I was telling her that I loved all the looks because it's my type of style and fashion too. So smart casual, right?
Exactly.
But yeah, so my journey into dentistry, like many that don't come from a typical dental background, and what I would say typical or traditional is, I didn't start in a dental practice. I came from pharmaceuticals, life sciences, that side of healthcare. So back in the day, I was on this roadmap to become a plastic surgeon. I was going through all the prerequisites, going through all the courseworks while I was in high school. I went to a very specialized high school when I was still living in California during my freshman year. So we were actually more of a trade school. So you were able to be more hyper-focused on like a specific area. So if you wanted to go into automotives, you can go work on cars. You can go into wood shop, metal shop, healthcare, nursing, all of those things. And healthcare was always something that I was interested in. So as I started dabbling into more of the life sciences work, getting into like the cadaver labs and working with like things, I was very grossed out by it. So I did not want to pursue a career clinically whatsoever because I didn't have the stomach for it. I am very sensitive to smells, so probably not going to be the best surgeon doing your nose job. So I decided to take a pivot and go more of the business side of healthcare. And that's when I joined the corporate world and worked with McKesson, CVS Health, very heavily in a lot of the implementations, people operations capacities. And it got to the point where I was just working heavily on projects. I was an implementation manager. I was leading a lot of projects that were coming into our gamut and really staffing, streamlining, creating the systems, processes, all that stuff to get these products and programs really deployed and back into the market. Because once the FDA released them, I was one of the guys behind the scenes making sure that things were moving to ensure that we can bring it to market now. And loved that entire journey of it, but I wasn't happy with how I was feeling inside of the entire experience. And at this point, I was 23 years old. So I was still young. I was still hungry. I was still looking to grow and expand, really the type of impact and reach that I wanted to have. And I wasn't necessarily seeing it there. And you see these names, McKesson and CVS Health, these are large corporations, right? These are big, big monsters in the healthcare space. And with that comes its own bucket of issues and challenges, right? And my bucket of issues and challenges at that time was growth and potential. At 23 years old, I've made it pretty far inside of the corporate ladder. And now what's next for me is a couple extra acronyms in front of my title or behind my title. More money, sure, but same job, same issues, same everything else. So I am somebody that's a creature of change. I get fixated on something really well for a few years at a time. And then I'm like, all right, ready for something new. And at that point, it was the right opportunity to bring me and invite me into dentistry. So I stepped into the world of dentistry as a practice management consultant. I joined my husband's consulting agency. I stepped in as his COO, built out his operations, built out his HR division, inherited all his employees, and then quickly got into the field and was consulting with underperforming practices around Arizona. So we were traveling around all of the Phoenix metro area, northern Arizona, southern Arizona too. So we were all over the place. And, I just wore the hat of continuous improvement. That was my biggest thing is, I'm coming into an industry that I don't know a lot about. I know health is focused on patients, of course. So let me focus on that. And that's where I just continued to look at where are the opportunities with the team? Where are the breakdowns with how the people are engaging with one another? What's the conversation look like with the patients? Do people want to be here? Is it showing up in their language, right? And a lot of that comes from just basic customer service training and skill sets. And that's corporate grooming at its finest when you come in and get thrown into a situation. It's sink or swim in many instances. So I've learned to create a couple floaties here and there as I need them. But it's been an amazing journey into dentistry so far. And, I want to say my first year into dentistry was wrapped up in 2019. And at that point, I had just graduated with my master's degree as well. So I wanted to shift and focus more on the personnel aspect, which brought me into the world of psychology. A little over 6.5, 7 years ago, I was really focusing heavily on these practices, being more mindful and again, creatures of habit, creatures of change, always still needing to remind myself to be attentive and courteous and intentional. But I probably wouldn't have been able to be that much more self-aware if I didn't go down this pathway of, how do I be much more aware of the people around me so I can be a better version of myself for those that I'm encompassing myself in that environment. Lots of stuff.
I mean, amazing journey. And so you have your PhD, correct?
Yeah, so I'm a 4th-year resident in my PhD right now. So I graduated from my program last March, and I'm just in my complete dissertation and residency stages right now, and it's been tough.
Well, so, you live by the continuously growing and improving. I love that that's kind of your mantra.
Yeah, it's important. I feel like if we're not moving and we're not changing anything or ideas or values or anything in that sense, then how much forward are we moving in that sense? And are we happy and I would say satisfied with those levels of movements too?
As you know, dentistry can be a bit of an outdated industry as a whole. Granted, I think the past few years have seen rapid growth there. How do you even incorporate what you're teaching with psychology and the safety into dental practices? When I'm reflecting on, my father's practice and little old school, we didn't talk about feelings, that certain generations didn't really talk about feelings. How do you start when you go into an office bringing up these ideas that can be more foreign to some leaders in the practice?
Yeah, great question. That was part of my journey as well. I was very much a blueprint process driven person. So anything outside the lines, you don't color outside the lines. So that means you don't feel outside those lines at times. So even in my own experience coming into work and coming into conversations, I've had to remind myself to be mindful of when it's appropriate to be empathetic versus sympathetic. And I've crossed and blurred those lines profusely inside of my career. And I've learned from those lessons each time. I might have an idea that's super exciting and I'm interested to share it. Doesn't necessarily mean my team's interested in hearing me or hearing that idea or the conversation I even have. I may not have the level of rapport with that person that I think that I have with them. So then we're now aware of that too. I was a young leader. I was been thrown into different challenges and issues. I've not been the best leader in instances, and I've had to take those moments to learn from it too. So knowing that and knowing that I can't just come into a practice and wave a magic wand and everyone's going to be kumbayaing and the energy is going to be amazing and people are going to be so happy and there's no more tension, right? No, it's recognizing that. And that's the position that I take from it. Look, guys, I'm coming in to help you. I want to come and support you to make sure that your voice and your talent is seen in the practice. How would that work for you? The moment we start engaging and listening, I'm much more of a listener than I am a talker. I will sit back and observe and watch, and then I will engage as I find my opportunity to. But I'm not somebody that's just going to be super overbearing. I need to take up the space in the conversation. I'd rather give it to somebody else that may not have had it. So that's really the first step is let me listen first. Let me hear what's going on, and then let me make a recommendation when you're ready for it. Part of the challenge that I've seen in dentistry is because at times times we're so antiquated in either the technology that we're utilizing or the resources that we have access to, or just the overall conversations that we have with our people. There's opportunities there just to slow down and just be with it in that moment. And we all heard the saying, slow down to speed up, right? But what's the timeline that you're putting on it? And I think because we get so fixated on creating the solution, we're not sitting with some of the things that we should be for the moment. And then we have those thoughts that come back to us. Oh, I should have said this. Oh, I should have said that. Or I could have done this and that would have been a so much better experience than what we did. It is what it is. So you just got to keep rolling with it, keep flowing with it. I've learned that being vulnerable and being authentic is not a scary thing. That's what people are attracted to. And that was a hard thing to learn myself. You're coming in and you feel as though you have to have this rough, rigid persona. And, Ashley, we're young. So we're coming into these conversations and many times we're being told well, grab a chair to find your seat at the table. Well, no, screw it. I'm making my own table. I'm finding my own seats and I'm finding the own heads that I want at my table, right? So bringing that into the conversation is part of the angle and the playfulness that I like to have, because it's not that serious at the end of the day, right? Sure, there's life and death and there's factors of health that are at play here. And there are other things that are going on in our own individual lives that are at times much more detrimental than our experience in the office.
I'd really like for you to break down in dental people's terms, kind of circling back to this probably isn't a prevalent conversation for a lot of offices. What do psychological safety and trust even mean? And then maybe do your magical speaking thing here and work in the difference between empathy and sympathy, because I think a lot of people probably have a hard time with that too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So when we start looking at the factors of psychological safety, this construct, if you will, was brought forward many, many years ago. And this was first introduced by a Harvard professor her name is Amy Edmondson, brilliant professor, really hyper-focused inside of people and personnel and team engagement. And she introduced the concept of psychological safety as a means of really feeling, do I have a safe space wherever I am, whether it's in work, whether I'm at the grocery store? Do I have a safe space to just feel and not feel judged or anything along those lines? So her research and studies really encapsulated a lot of that. And she continued doing research around the conversations, not just the social norms that we might typically experience, but also going into the layers of what are the subconscious and unconscious conversations that are also taking place. So the remark that I made a moment ago about where we start reflecting on what we could have said, that also is an aspect of, whether or not safety was present in the conversation for me to be fully vocal about how I felt. And that could be tied to challenger safety, meaning can I challenge the status quo? Can I challenge the ideas or the norms that we have in the practice? Or are they going to be completely pushed under the rug, thrown out the window, whatever the framework is, right? That's where we start seeing the conversations light up a little differently. And the sweet spot when you start looking at the four factors of psychological safety, which was later introduced by Dr. Timothy Clark back in 2020, he broke it down by contributor safety, learner safety, inclusion safety, and challenger safety. The biggest safety component that you always want to be in, shocker, is the learner safety aspect of it. Because you're constantly growing from the conversations that you're having. The more vulnerable that you're having them, the more aware that the team becomes, the more interested in the outcomes that they begin to generate. So that's where we start really creating that team symbiosis of what's going on. What really is the construct of us having this conversation? Because what I have seen over time and what I like to remind people of, it's important to have healthy debates. A disagreement is a disagreement, but there's only so much emotion and vigor attached to it with the amount of energy that we apply to it. So when we start being fixated on our own perspective and our own viewpoint or point of view, whatever the term is, we're losing interest and we've now created a wall and we're no longer listening to whatever other opposing interest might be. Now, when contributor, challenger, and learner safety and the other one are all in the mix, the inclusion safety aspect too, we can have those conversations a little bit more heated, right? But they're not heated in the sense of Stephanie, Ashley, I'm not coming back to the office tomorrow. Screw you guys. I'm out, right? It's okay, here you guys, consider this. What if we tried this for a new patient special for the month of October, and for every new patient that we come in, they get a jack-o'-lantern? Okay, we tried that last October. It didn't work. Okay, well, how about we now try maybe a pumpkin carving contest? Let's see how crazy and neurotic our patients can be if we give them a challenge, right? What type of conversations are we having or are we constantly just shooting them to the floor, pushing them under the rug, or just not listening to them at all? So that then opens the conversation for that, right? Because we're all coming together, whether we're working together in an office or we work remotely in many instances, we still have to create that level of team and camaraderie. And that even leads into how we're operating as leaders and owners. Stephanie, you touched on the sympathy and empathy card. Just recently, I had a mindset shift with one of my managers and train him that, yes, there's an impact with an experience that is happening on your team. That impact is a direct impact to you. That conversation needs to be then had with your client so they become aware. And if you don't have it with them, who do you think is going to be coming to you about an issue? Your client. So what actually needs to happen is this. To give you a little kimono view to that, there's been a conversation in our team really heavily about ownership. What does it look like to operate inside of complete ownership, complete integrity, doing complete work? When we sign our name on something, we want people to know that, oh, Jonathan touched that, or oh, PJ touched that, Michael, whomever touched it, that Zia touched it, right? But we want it to be in the essence of positive experiences at many times that we can control. So when we start looking at the concept of ownership, that's where we pulled in the card recently of it's okay to be empathetic and it's also okay to be very sympathetic. So this example, two team members on this person's team called out. No notice, didn't provide any form of answer as far as when they're coming in. Okay, there's work to be done. And I'm looking at it from the business owner perspective, like, okay, got it, totally understand. I hope they're okay. What's the backup plan? And they didn't have a backup plan. So I was like, okay, this is where we need to look at how we provide empathy versus sympathy to the team that's in question. Totally understand that there's an issue. Maybe there's a personal circumstance. In this case, it was, and that caused a breakdown. That breakdown shouldn't also cost our experience that we're providing to our client. So what are we doing in that instance? I don't want to be a micromanager. I don't want to be a shark. I don't want to feel like I don't care. We 100% care. We care so much that we also want to be responsible for the impact of us caring on this area that's going to cause a triple effect over here. So now we have to look at it from the holistic point of view. So then we go into a conversation. Let's talk about what sympathy is. Let's talk about what empathy is, right? And then we go deeper and deeper into that nutshell. But for the sake of this conversation, when we start looking at really empathizing with an individual and sympathizing with someone, sympathy doesn't necessarily lead to action. So when you're wanting to be sympathetic with an individual, take that moment to be present with them and be with them in that instance and be okay with it. Now, if you're looking to be empathetic and an action is required or you're expecting something, got it, hear you. What do you need from me? What can I do to support you? Do you need anything else? Okay, thank you. Now here's something else for you to consider because of this, right? It's all in the linguistics and the conversations that we have. But if you're not having them, then what ends up getting created is further resentment. Oh, this person doesn't do their job. They're never here. They're always off, right? Whatever reasons or narratives that we then self-create and then self-sabotage our experience with that individual. It's going back to what matters most to actually create the level of experience or exchange that we want to have either amongst our team or even on just a one-on-one basis. My relationship with my team is different amongst every individual, but that's because we're all different people. I'm crazy, so I know I have to tone it down with some people on my team.
Not crazy at all. That was an amazing breakdown, though. I love the little one's to take action, one is not to take action. And I think going into conversations with that in mind helps you tweak the conversation and prepare. So that's an amazing takeaway for myself. So thank you very much.
Yeah, Ashley, same here. And that discussion or those points actually made me think of a social media post I saw recently about psychological safety of the team versus customer service and patients. And of course, the team is first because they have to be well to serve the patients. But Jonathan, I'm wondering, what are your points for bridging that gap, if you will, to make sure the patients that are super anxious and don't want to be there and, they can be a little difficult to deal with sometimes coming at the team and nobody's being emotional or reactive or feeling awful about going to work?
Yeah, absolutely. Those are such really valid points to bring forward in today's market and today's workplace in itself. I always think about the value system to come back to. So what are the values of the practice? What are the values of the individualistic traits that you want to see being embodied, whether it's through conversation, physical expression? And part of that approach was identifying what really does come first inside of your organization. Is it your team and culture, or is it your clients and stakeholders? And that was an internal view that we looked at within our company is, who are we actually putting on a quote unquote pedestal? And oftentimes we default to the client because they're the ones providing us an income. They're the ones providing us an ability to provide support to them. We're providing opportunities to other individuals. And that can all fall apart if you have nobody else behind you to support whatever it is, that service level of agreement you might have brought forward. So when you start looking at it from those different angles and shifting it to the team service versus just customer service, we get to start seeing that heightened engagement, I would say. There's all these things going around about quiet quitting, and now you got quiet vacationing as the latest term that they're throwing around. So I'm like, geez, where was these types of conversations when I was getting started and I could have just coasted and hung out, right? But that's just not my demeanor. So that's the other thing to consider is who do you have on your team that is a coaster, which is fine. You need your coasters and contributors. And who are those that are actually spearheading the change in the organization, whether it's at the practice level, whether there's expansion in discussion, all of those build into one another. It's a matter of how you really want to build it forward, though, and build it out. And you guys know right now, staffing is a huge challenge, but what people are looking for right now is an impact. So how are you creating the level of impact, whether it is with a patient that's dealing with a form of anxiety or phobia? I was that patient before too. Many of us have been the patient before as well. We just find ways to get over it at times or not look at it as scary as it might seem or occur. So just being present, there's so much power in being present and not even conversing. You'll be amazed by what just starts opening up when you just start creating the space of just listening.
So, it sounds so easy to be present, but that's been on my every New Year's board of this year, I'm going to be present. And it's hard because you have so many things, especially at the dental office, so many fires that feel like they're going on at one time that it's hard to just pause and be present with the people in front of you and not thinking about either the end of day when I'm done or getting through the day instead of living in the day. That is very wise.
One thing I want to take a step back, though, that you touched on, Steph, was the anxiety and the phobia. And, mental health has been such a huge conduit in our conversations lately from COVID. And we put so much emphasis there. But what type of anxiety or phobias are coming up from the team member that are now having to embrace that from another person? Those are the other things that we're not training our team members on. These are either innate, natural ways of being that we bring forward. If you're service-minded individual, you're jumping into service, right? If you're somebody that's more analytical, reserved, how are you going to peel those layers back to comfort someone that's not used to comforting that way?
It's very true. It reminds me of those, the DISC assessment to find out, which I recommend. It doesn't have to be that specific one, but finding out how your team operates and communicates. It's wild to see the differences. And it doesn't mean one person does it the right or wrong way. We just all operate different. And for me, I'm a very low, IS was very low. And my sister that worked on our team was very high. So there was not conflict, but we communicated completely different. When she would come into the consult room and cry, it made me uncomfortable. And I was like, can you not cry in front of me? Because it makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable. But it's important to know who your team members are on a deeper level so you can understand each other. What would be, because I'm sure there's many listeners today that are thinking, okay, this is not my office. We are not a safe place to have these conversations. We're not set up for success with this type of communication. What would you say are the key takeaways that they could start implementing now to just start building those blocks of psychological safety in the practice?
Yeah, great question. So as you're starting to really evaluate where the change needs to take place, and if you're feeling unsafe, that's really the first question that you start asking yourself. Can I be my authentic self? Am I safe to contribute? Can I grow here? And can I challenge the status quo? If you go through those 4 simple questions, and if they're all no, that's a red flag. And it's not a red flag of deuces, I'm out, right? No, it's no, this is an opportunity to shift the change. And I can be the first person to raise my hand and say, hey guys, let's take a look at this a little differently. Let's have a conversation about X, Y, and Z. Again, new patient specials, promotions to existing patients. celebrations in the practice, in Office Manager Appreciation Month. What are conversations that we're bringing forward in this month? And are we talking about how safe and trustful our team feels? And if not, create some fun exercises. I don't know if you guys have seen like the ruling memes about the trust falls, but they're like turned into marketing
Love
videos
those.
now. I wouldn't say do that one, but it's a fun one, right? Like bring in that level of playfulness and excitement in the conversations is always first. The other thing that I always touch on is the kind of meetings that you're having. Are you having a check-in or a check-on meeting? Check-in meaning I'm checking in with a person. How are you doing? How's that project going at home? How's your family? When's your next vacation? Whatever, right? I'm checking in with you. I'm concerned about how you're doing. Versus a check-on. Hey, Ashley, can you give me the status of the RCM breakdown for block? Can you give me the breakdown for the eligibilities for 3 days out, right? Like we start going more tactical. We start going more action-oriented, tasks, projects, milestones. So that's where you get to make it more work-focused. And oftentimes we try to blend it into one conversation. So it's like the first 5 minutes are like, yeah, let's shoot it over. Let's see how everyone's doing. All right, great. We have like 17 things to cover in the next 40 minutes. So then you're stuck doing that. And then what happens? The meeting is elongated and then you're going on even further and then you're not feeling as though you got something done or you don't feel productive. So when you start delineating the two, check-in versus check-on, that's where I like to have those conversations, emphasizing more of the check-in discussion, of course, because as you mentioned, Ashley, the personality of the person, many of the conversations when I'm coming in is just trying to build rapport. I have to build trust with you so I can understand where the gaps are and then help you be better in the practice for your team as a leader, whatever role you're playing. But having the conversation and asking yourself is the first step, but then bringing it forward is the next step to bringing it alive. That's how you prioritize psychological safety, is making it a conversation. And if you're not, it's going to go back to our default way of being. And it's very, very easy for us to slip into that.
Yeah, I'm taking that check-in, check-on. Wow. Like that's you just described probably every meeting that I have is check in and go to check on right away. By default, like the checking on for me is like very easy. The checking in can be a harder muscle to flex. So I think it's important like segmenting those and having your check-ins that are specifically to check in with the person and the check on. That's an amazing thing.
Yeah. And it's through my own learning that similar, I've been in the same conversations and I catch myself even today that I'm doing it. So it's hard to reprogram our programming, right? But I think, again, as we're doing it, as we're making it a point, it's always a learning opportunity. So the more we're learning and the more we're bringing to the team and as open as they can be, then awesome. Let's keep growing together. If not, then we start looking at other
Very
directions.
true. And when you said that, just say you answered no to, you don't have a safe place at your work, that it's not necessarily that, okay, I need to leave. It's an opportunity. Like anytime you come across anything that isn't the way it should be, like that is an opportunity for growth. And to me, that's very exciting. We can get better. So I love kind of to twist people's view on issues that they see in their practice that, hey, these are great opportunities for us to get better and to grow together. I know there's going to be a lot of people that are going to want more information and to reach out to you. And what is the best way for our listeners to get in touch with you and learn more?
Yeah, so website would be the quickest way. talentbyzia.com is our URL for all of our recruiting and consulting offerings. Our handle is @talentbyzia, and then any of my personal stuff is on my education platform, which is The Chief Psycho. So that's
I love that name, by the way.
Thank you.
We will make sure to put all those in the show notes as well. So I highly recommend that our listeners reach out to Jonathan. And I just want to thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, no pun intended, with us and the listeners. And there's so many great takeaways that people can now go with and make their offices better. So thank you so much for being here.
Of course. Thank you guys.
See you all next time.
Thank you for joining us on today's journey through a new era of dentistry with your host, Ashley Bond. With wisdom in their network of industry leaders, each episode offers fresh insights and support in the evolving world of dentistry. Subscribe, stay tuned, and transform your career, practice, and patient experience. Until next time, keep innovating, keep caring, and stay smiling.